As I promised yesterday, we're going to look at Job's response to his friends. Their first, well, actually, they'll speak three different times, some of them. But Job is not buying what they're saying. He pushes back very strongly. He really has lost all patience with these friends right up front. And so we're going to kind of look at some of those. For example, in chapter 12, he feels that he's under attack. He says in verse 3, "But I have intelligence as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. And who does not know such things as these? I'm a joke to my friends." So he is not appreciating the counsel these boys are trying to give him. And he's saying, "I'm not stupid here. You think that I don't know these things? And I'm just a joke. Are you guys making fun of me? Are you mocking me?" He's not appreciating this. In chapter 13, he says their counsel is worthless. He says, "But you smear with lies," verse 4, "and you are all worthless physicians." So these friends are trying to be physicians, they're trying to be healers, but they're worthless as far as Job is concerned. And on top of that, in chapter 16, it's kind of interesting. They accuse Job of this same fault, but Job does to them as well. Chapter 16, verse 2, he accuses them of being windbags. Verse 3, he says, verse 2, he says, "Sorry comforters are all of you." Verse 3, "Is there no limit to the windy words?" No. In verse 4, I too could speak like you if I were in your place. They accuse Job of windy words too. They both call each other windbags, maybe with some truth to both of those accusations. But more importantly, our friend Job is losing patience with God. We've dropped back to chapter 6, and we start picking up that Job is wearing thin with God. Now, he never, as we'll follow the whole storyline, he never rebels against God directly. He never blasphemes God in any sense, but he does get pretty pointed, and he says some things that are pretty wrong and pretty tough. But chapter 6, for example, he says in verse 4, "For the arrows of the Almighty are within me." So God is attacking Job, and he feels under this attack from God himself. In chapter 7 and verse 20, he actually says this, "Why have you set me as your target?" And he says something similar in chapter 16, verse 12 as well. He sees God shooting arrows at him, poison arrows, so to speak, and he's become God's target. Now that's a very bad place to be, to believe that God is aiming his arrows at us as a target to inflict pain and suffering in our lives. But that's kind of where he is at here. And going over all the way over to 19 and verse 6, he believes that God has wronged him. He says in verse 6, "Know then that God has wronged me and has closed his net around me." Now, it's one thing to believe that God is in charge of and in control of the struggles you're going through. It's a different thing to believe that God has truly wronged you, because that is at least borderline accusing God of sinfulness, because God does no wrong. So Job is coming up with some pretty bad things here. So what Job wants to do, and he comes to this time and time again, he wants to have his day in court with God. He wants to sit down and argue his case with God. We're back up to chapter 9 to get a flavor of this. In verse 32, Job 9:32, he says, "For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, that we may go to court together. There is no umpire between us." Now, God has wronged me, and I have something to say. I have a defense, but there's no one to arbitrate. There's no umpire here. How am I going to get my case across with someone like God without some kind of an arbitrator? Going over to chapter 13 and verse 3, he says, "But I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to argue with God." So he believes he has a case here. He believes that he has something he can say with God, to God, and that God ought to listen to him. He wants his day in court. In verse 18, he says this, "Behold, now I have prepared my case. I know that I will be vindicated." So he believes that once he goes before God, lays out his position, his argument, that God's going to have to say, "Okay, Job, you're right. I've done wrong by you, and I give in, you're right." That's what he believes. He wants his day in court. Now we know, Job doesn't know this yet, but we know down the line toward the end of the book, Job does get his day in court, and things do not turn out the way Job thought they would. But that's for another day. We'll look at that at a different occasion. But we are going to go back tomorrow and look at another more positive aspect of Job's response to God. So let's go back. Let's do that tomorrow. Hope you can join us to see what Job is up to tomorrow.